certainly all fiat currencies are going to lose value. I mean, all central banks are creating inflation, but I think the dollar will lose value relative to other fiat currencies, but all these currencies will lose value in real terms. So people all around the world are going to see a loss of purchasing power of their local currency. The best currency to own would be not a currency at all, but real money, which is gold. Gold and silver, I think, will continue to retain and, in fact, even increase in purchasing power over time. But also, I think it's important to have money in productive dividend-paying assets. You can't just have everything in gold and silver. I think over the longer term, you'll get better returns from productive assets. It's just that in the U.S., those productive assets are overpriced, and the U.S. economy is headed for a dramatic collapse, which is not going to be good for U.S. assets, and inflation is going to wipe out the value of U.S. dollar-denominated debt. It was going to be out of control anyway. I mean, now I think they have a convenient scapegoat where they can blame it all on Putin. But Putin, you can blame Putin for a lot of things, but U.S. inflation is not one of them. We're creating the inflation ourselves. It's the U.S. government, it's the U.S. Federal Reserve. And, I don't condone what Putin is doing, but I do think the sanctions are going to backfire, which is usually the case with whatever government does. I don't think they're going to achieve their desired objective. But I think they are going to ultimately weaken the U.S. economy even further and ultimately put into jeopardy the dollar's role as the reserve currency even sooner than what otherwise would have been the case. I mean, I think the dollar was on its way out as the global reserve currency, but we just gave it a bit of a push, and maybe the rest of the world will give up on the dollar sooner rather than later. I think the Chinese currency is going to appreciate rather substantially against the U.S. dollar, and I think that's going to be very good for the Chinese people. It's going to be horrible for the United States because it's going to make Chinese goods dramatically more expensive for American consumers, so most American consumers will have to give up on those goods. We don't have the ability to produce the goods ourselves. It'll take a long time for that to develop. But look, if you look at China, Russia, and India, I mean, right there, you're close to half the world's population just in those three countries. And you have tremendous economic productivity going on in those countries. You have China producing all these manufactured goods. You have tremendous resources production out of Russia. And there's a lot going on in India as well. So, they don't really need the rest of the world. I think those three countries could do very fine, even if they were isolated among themselves, which they won't be, because they'll also be trading with a lot of other parts of the world, including South America, Africa, other parts of Southeast Asia. So you really just have the United States, Western Europe, and maybe the rest of the former United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, those countries that would kind of hold tight in this anti-Russia sanction mode. But the rest of the world could do very well without those countries. And the problem is, we've got the big debts. We've got to borrow all this money, and the United States is completely dependent on the rest of the world for the production of the consumer goods that make the economy work and that satisfy individual needs. And so if we're going to try to piss off and isolate ourselves from our biggest bankers and our biggest suppliers, we're in for a world of hurt. And ultimately, the sanctions could end up doing a lot more damage in the United States than they do in Russia. And by the way, the Russian ruble is actually higher now than it was when the sanctions were imposed. There was an initial 40% or so drop in the ruble, but the ruble has recovered all those losses and is now higher than it was when the sanctions were imposed in the day that they invaded Ukraine. And look at the demographics in China. And you have a much younger population base there that are working and productive and well-educated. So it's a big difference in the dynamic, and you're right. I mean, the 21st century is the Chinese century. I mean, that's unfortunate reality. Maybe America could get it back towards the end of the century. I won't be around to see it. But the 20th century was the American century, and the 21st century belongs to China. I mean, it's obvious that baton is being passed, because unfortunately, there's more economic freedom in China than there is in the United States. I mean, there may be more political freedom here, but it's economic freedom that ultimately drives productivity, innovation, and living standards. And they have more of that in China than we have here. And unfortunately, the pendulum is swinging in the wrong direction. We're going to continue to lose more and more of our economic freedom, and then our political freedom will be next. Yeah, and I'm not upset that the Chinese have gained economic freedom. I mean, that's great. I'm just upset that Americans have lost it. I mean, the whole world should be more free, but that means we need less government. But unfortunately, governments tend to be like a cancer. Whenever you have a government, it just grows and grows and grows. And like a cancer, it does more and more damage the larger it gets. Trade deficits really started to explode, I think, in the 1980s, but a lot of it was the result of going off the gold standard in the 1970s and getting to a position where we no longer had to produce stuff, we could just print money. Because when we were on the gold standard, we couldn't just print money because we had to mine gold first. But once we went off the gold standard and we could just create money out of thin air and then use that money to buy what everybody else produces, we started printing more and producing less and relying more and more heavily on the rest of the world. And that was also an escape valve for American corporations, because as we increased regulation and taxation, the way U.S. businesses were able to survive was to move all of their production offshore.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address, because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I intend, how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.